They really know not just about their regiment, but about the character that they portray. And their wives and girlfriends are involved too.
You think you know the story of Gettysburg's 3 bloodiest days. But the real battle happened 130 years later when director Ronald F. Maxwell tried to recreate the Civil War's most decisive moment. Martin Sheen, Jeff Daniels, and Tom Berenger weren't just playing generals. They were carrying the weight of American history on their shoulders, while 5,000 obsessed Civil War reenactors turned a movie set into an actual battlefield. What you're about to discover will shock you. A director so consumed with historical accuracy, he nearly destroyed himself. Actors who discovered their own ancestors fought at Gettysburg, and a production so massive it became its own war. The cannons were fake, but the blood, sweat, and obsession were terrifyingly real. Ronald F. Maxwell, director. Let's start with Ronald F. Maxwell, the man whose 20-year obsession with recreating Gettysburg consumed his entire life and nearly killed him in the process. But what most people don't realize is that Maxwell wasn't just directing a movie. He was fighting his own personal war against Hollywood's historical ignorance. And his fanatical dedication to authenticity would shock even the most devoted Civil War buffs. Maxwell first read Michael Shara's novel, The Killer Angels, in the early 1970s and became so obsessed with bringing it to the screen that he spent 2 decades of his life trying to make it happen. Every major studio rejected his vision, calling it too long, too expensive, and unmarketable. They wanted him to add a love story, create fictional characters, or focus on a single hero. Maxwell refused every compromise, insisting that the real story was dramatic enough without Hollywood fabrication. But here's the shocking secret most fans never learned. Maxwell mortgaged his own house, maxed out credit cards, and borrowed money from family members to keep the project alive. He was so financially desperate that he lived in near poverty for years, surviving on odd jobs while continuing to develop the script. His wife later admitted she almost left him because his Gettysburg obsession was destroying their family's financial security. The most revealing truth about Maxwell's approach was his absolute refusal to romanticize the Civil War. While other directors might have focused on heroic charges and noble sacrifices, Maxwell was determined to show the brutal reality of 19th century warfare. He spent years studying medical records, battlefield archaeology, and soldiers' personal letters to understand exactly how men died at Gettysburg. This research became so psychologically heavy that Maxwell began having nightmares about the battle, sometimes waking up convinced he could hear cannon fire. When he finally got the green light to make the film, Maxwell's perfectionism bordered on madness. He insisted on filming at the actual Gettysburg battlefield, even though it meant navigating complex agreements with the National Park Service and historical preservation societies. Jeff Daniels, Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain. Jeff Daniels arrived at Gettysburg as a Hollywood leading man known for romantic comedies. But what happened to him during the production was a complete transformation that shocked everyone who knew him. Playing Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain, the main professor turned war hero, became Daniels' most physically and emotionally demanding role. And the secrets behind his preparation reveal an actor willing to sacrifice everything for historical authenticity. The most shocking revelation? Daniels had never heard of Joshua Lawrence Chamberlain before being offered the role, despite Chamberlain being one of the Civil War's most decorated officers. When Maxwell first described the character, Daniels thought he was being asked to play a fictional composite. It wasn't until he began researching that he discovered Chamberlain was not only real, but had performed one of the most decisive actions in American military history during the defense of Little Round Top. Daniels' preparation went to extremes that worried his family and friends. He spent months learning to march in authentic 1860s military formations, practicing with a real Civil War-era sword until his hands were bloody and calloused. He studied Chamberlain's actual writings, his teaching methods at Bowdoin College, and even learned to speak with a Maine accent that had disappeared decades earlier. The physical transformation was so complete that Daniels lost significant weight and developed the lean, hardened look of a Civil War officer. But here's what stunned even Maxwell. Daniels discovered during filming that his own ancestor had fought in the Civil War, serving in a Pennsylvania regiment that had been present at Gettysburg. This revelation hit Daniel so powerfully that he broke down during one of the battle scenes, overwhelmed by the realization that he was walking in his own family's footsteps. Cast members reported seeing Daniels alone on Little Round Top after filming wrapped, staring at the landscape where his ancestor might have fought 130 years earlier. Martin Sheen, Robert E. Lee. Martin Sheen's casting as Robert E. Lee was perhaps the most controversial decision in the entire production. And the secrets behind his performance reveal an actor grappling with the moral complexities of playing America's most beloved Confederate general. But what most fans never realized was how deeply this role challenged everything Sheen believed about war, honor, and American history. Sheen was already Hollywood's most prominent anti-war activist, having starred in Apocalypse Now and later becoming a vocal critic of American military interventions. Taking on the role of Lee meant embodying a man who had led a rebellion against the United States government. And this contradiction created a psychological conflict that Sheen struggled with throughout the production. The most shocking preparation secret? Sheen spent months visiting Lee's actual locations. His home at Arlington, his grave at Washington and Lee University, even the house where he was born. But unlike typical method acting research, Sheen was searching for evidence of Lee's internal conflict about slavery and secession. He read every letter Lee had written about the decision to resign from the U.S. Army, looking for signs that Lee had moral doubts about his choice. But the most revealing secret was Sheen's physical transformation. He spent hours each day in makeup having his face aged and his hair styled to match Lee's appearance, but he also adopted Lee's actual mannerisms and speech patterns. Sheen studied films of Lee's surviving staff officers and read descriptions of how Lee carried himself. The result was so authentic that several Civil War historians on set reported feeling genuinely unsettled, as if they were watching Lee himself. Tom Berenger, James Longstreet. Tom Berenger's transformation into James Longstreet, Lee's old warhorse, carried secrets that went far deeper than his physical appearance. Coming off his Oscar-nominated performance as the brutal Sergeant Barnes in Platoon, Berenger faced the challenge of playing another complex military figure. But this time, one whose controversial reputation had been debated by historians for over a century. The most shocking revelation about Berenger's preparation was his discovery that Longstreet had become a scapegoat for the Confederacy's defeat at Gettysburg. Southern historians had blamed Longstreet for Lee's failures, partly because he had joined the Republican Party after the war and supported Reconstruction. Berenger realized he wasn't just playing a general. He was rehabilitating the reputation of a man who had been unfairly vilified by lost cause mythology. But here's what even Maxwell didn't expect. Berenger's research into Longstreet triggered his own family revelation. While studying genealogical records, Berenger discovered that his own ancestors had fought for the Union Army, making him another actor with personal Civil War connections. This discovery created an internal conflict as he prepared to embody one of the Confederacy's most effective generals. Berenger's method acting went to psychological extremes that concerned his co-stars. He adopted Longstreet's habit of speaking slowly and deliberately, his tendency to stroke his beard while thinking, and even his slight limp from an earlier war wound. But more disturbing was how Berenger channeled Longstreet's growing opposition to Lee's tactical decisions. During scenes where Longstreet argues against Pickett's charge, Berenger's frustration was so authentic that Martin Sheen later said it felt like watching the actual historical argument unfold. The massive cast secrets. The supporting players in Gettysburg carried stories that were just as compelling as the leads, and many of them brought personal connections to the Civil War that added unexpected authenticity to their performances. These weren't just actors playing historical figures. They were people discovering their own places in America's bloodiest conflict. Stephen Lang's preparation for George Pickett, the general whose name became synonymous with doomed courage, revealed an actor wrestling with the moral complexity of military heroism. Lang discovered that Pickett had been a mediocre student at West Point, graduating last in his class, yet had become famous for leading one of the war's most tragic charges. Lang spent weeks studying Pickett's personal letters, particularly his correspondence with his young wife, trying to understand how a man could maintain romantic optimism while preparing for almost certain death. The most shocking revelation came from Richard Jordan, who played Louis Armistead, Pickett's brigadier general who dies reaching the Union lines during the famous charge. Jordan was secretly battling brain cancer during filming, though he told no one on the production. His performance of a dying Confederate officer was informed by his own confrontation with mortality, adding a layer of tragic authenticity that no one understood at the time. Jordan's final scene, where Armistead falls mortally wounded while touching a Union cannon, was filmed just months before Jordan's own death. C. Thomas Howell, playing Tom Chamberlain, Joshua's younger brother, brought his own family dynamics to the role. Howell had actually grown up with a domineering older brother, and he used those real sibling tensions to inform the relationship between the Chamberlain brothers. The scenes where Tom struggles to live up to Joshua's expectations carried genuine emotional weight from Howell's own childhood experiences. Production warfare. The making of Gettysburg was itself a logistical nightmare that nearly broke everyone involved, creating a production environment so chaotic and demanding that cast members later compared it to actual military service. Ronald F. Maxwell's obsession with authenticity meant that nothing could be faked, compromised, or simplified. And the secrets of what really happened during those brutal months of filming reveal a director who had lost all sense of proportion. The most shocking aspect was the sheer scale of the production. Maxwell assembled over 5,000 Civil War reenactors to serve as extras, creating what was essentially a small army complete with authentic uniforms, weapons, and equipment. These weren't professional extras. They were obsessive hobbyists who had spent years perfecting their 1860s personas and who took historical accuracy more seriously than most professional historians. But managing this massive volunteer army created problems no one had anticipated. The reenactors were divided into Union and Confederate units, and old tensions from the Civil War began to resurface on set. Arguments broke out over historical interpretations, with Union reenactors accusing Confederate reenactors of romanticizing slavery, and Confederate reenactors claiming Union reenactors didn't understand Southern honor. Maxwell found himself mediating disputes that had been simmering in Civil War circles for decades. The most dangerous aspect was filming the massive battle scenes on the actual Gettysburg battlefield. The National Park Service had strict rules about what could and couldn't be done on the sacred ground, but Maxwell pushed those boundaries constantly. Historical obsession. Maxwell's dedication to historical accuracy went far beyond what any director had ever attempted, creating a production environment where Civil War experts wielded more power than Hollywood executives. The secrets behind this obsession reveal a film where authenticity became more important than entertainment, and where the line between education and fanaticism completely disappeared. The most shocking revelation was the Authenticity Police, a team of Civil War historians led by Brian Pohanka, who monitored every detail of the production. These weren't casual consultants offering occasional advice. They were academic zealots who examined every button, every weapon, every line of dialogue for historical accuracy. Pohanka once halted filming for an entire day because an extra was wearing a wristwatch that hadn't been invented until 1920. But the obsession went to terrifying extremes. Maxwell insisted that all dialogue be based on actual recorded statements, letters, or documented speech patterns from the 1860s. Actors couldn't improvise or add contemporary phrases. Every word had to be historically verified. This created a bizarre situation where professional actors were being coached not just on performance, but on 19th century grammar and regional dialects that had been extinct for decades. Cultural impact and controversy. When Gettysburg premiered as a television miniseries and later reached theaters, it didn't just entertain audiences. It reignited America's ongoing debate about Civil War memory and sparked controversies that revealed how divided the nation remained about its bloodiest conflict. The secrets behind its reception show how a historical film became a political battleground. The most unexpected impact was on Civil War tourism. Gettysburg National Military Park saw visitor numbers increase by over 40% after the film's release, as audiences wanted to walk the same ground they had seen on screen. But this surge created new problems, as increased foot traffic began to damage the historic battlefield. Park officials found themselves managing crowds who expected to see movie locations rather than somber memorials to American tragedy. The film's portrayal of slavery and Confederate motivations triggered fierce debates among Civil War scholars and heritage groups. Southern organizations criticized Maxwell for not adequately explaining the Confederacy's constitutional arguments, while Northern historians argued he had been too sympathetic to Confederate generals. These debates revealed how the Civil War remained a living political issue, rather than settled history. The most shocking long-term consequence was how Gettysburg influenced other historical films. Directors like Steven Spielberg and Mel Gibson later cited Maxwell's obsessive attention to detail as inspiration for their own historical epics, proving that audiences were hungry for authentic period drama rather than Hollywood glamorization. Gettysburg proved that sometimes the greatest battles happen behind the cameras. These actors didn't just play history, they lived it, breathed it, and were forever changed by it. Subscribe to uncover more shocking secrets from Hollywood's greatest epics.